Welcome, serverless creeps and comrades. Today we journey into the crypt, where I, your host, will sit down and talk about the serverless spooky production mishaps. We have several that we will discuss today, and guests from beyond the grave to share what they have found. Our first guest is here, though, because of the nature of their production mishap, unable to speak with us today. However, I have two guests of the flesh with us today. Scott, Aaron, please introduce yourselves to our audience.
Hello. I am the chief ghost at Olio Apps.
Yeah, and I'm boring old CTO of Olio Apps.
We have the mundane and the majestic with us here today. So thank you both for coming with us.
I should have brought my fangs. Yes.
Usually mine are retracted, but today I decided to hang loose. This is Thursday casual at the work from home office, so we get to have a little fun. Now, the first spooky production mishap I want to discuss today, and please, if anyone who is watching has a story or a scenario they would like to chat about briefly or comment on, I welcome that because you can never have enough spooky ghost stories, in my opinion. And this first story that I had, this is I think is a this is like a very popular one in the community. So popular that I saw it floating around on LinkedIn and Twitter posts, and it was so peculiar. I had to do some research and see was this made up or made up a simple fabrication or truth. And the story I did find, and maybe you are familiar with it, but it's published in a book called Project to Product by Gene Kim. And this is a story about the testing conditions of the Boeing 777 aircraft. Let me read this briefly. And this is within the context of how one company's perception and process towards product development is different from the other. The author was comparing some failed product development stories to successful ones in the age of software. And he was saying that my first exposure to this story about the Boeing 777 was told to me by Gail Murphy, then my professor in a third year software engineering course, about the production of Boeing 787's predecessor, the 777. The 777 was Boeing's first fly-by-wire plane. In other words, the software had to work, as it was purely software, controlling the flaps and rudders and preventing the plane from falling out of the sky. A very important piece of software. Gale recounted that due to the criticality of the software, Boeing decided to put all the heads of software engineering on the test flight.
Oh,
During the test flight, the plane started shaking, and the software engineers were able to implement a mid-flight fix via the turbulence control system. They go on to say, I have yet to find a better example of an organization putting software leaders' skin in the game of high-stakes product development. The comments of this scenario are also scary or horrifying in their own rights, I would say. There seems to be two camps. There's a camp of, I can't believe they did something like this, that this was legal. And number two, damn, they really don't just build and test software like they used to, which, any way you cut it, in my opinion, if you're the only thing standing between a plane falling out of the sky, whether you're a mechanical engineer, software engineer, that's a terrifying scenario and a terrifying leadership choice. But I'm glad that they were able to ship the update and they're able to live and tell the tale like this instead of something quite different.
That's an amazing story about how you the confidence in your product. I mean, in the company Scott and I worked in prior, right, to all your apps, Jive, we actually deployed the kind of we made a SaaS that was a Facebook for enterprise, right? And we always tested it internally with the 400 employees of that company. And it's not serverless, but I encountered horror with that. Literally, there was a memory leak in an area of code that I introduced that only happened to crash after 3 or 4 weeks of usage. There was no way to reproduce it in the lab, and it was a nightmare of proportions. And yeah, we were riding the airplane before shipping it out to customers. I don't know if you remember that, Scott, but that was like some of the darkest times in my life as an engineer.
I have another one related. It's also not serverless, but is
The
related.
memories are boiling up. Very
Yes,
nice.
it is.
So at Olio, we help work on a mobile app called Earplanes, and it's an app for helping you people who have ear pressure sensitivity. Some people have that, when you have a cold or something, or you get congested, and if you fly on an airplane, it pains you to descend and ascend. But some people have this more often. Anyway, this company sells earplugs to help you deal with that. I've used them; they work great. So we have a little companion app for it. And basically, the general idea of the app is we have barometer sensors in the phones now, and so they can understand when the pressure is changing and let you know. Even mid-flight, if they had to suddenly ascend 10,000 feet to avoid turbulence, like, oh, now's a good time to put your earplugs in, and now's a good time you can take them back out again. So we built this app, and turns out debugging it is hard because you can get it to work fine on the ground, but real world test conditions is like going 600 miles an hour, 700 miles an hour in a certain direction at 30,000 feet in the air, sometimes in airplane mode, no connectivity at all. So usage reports, like doing an actual test, is like getting on a plane and taking a flight with no connection to the internet, possibly. It's got to work like that. So we'd have a lot of cases where like it works great, and then even for me, like it works great going in the air, but sometimes we have people who, like, for some reason the app just not working for them, but it's like we can't get any metrics for that because every time to do that test, you got to fly 30,000 feet in the air with no connectivity.
I don't want to, just a really quick anecdote about that. I literally took the phone and taped to my ceiling fan in a vacuum sealed bag and had it rotate for 6 or 7 hours to make sure it never lost telemetry. And it's
oh yeah, because that would be another thing. It would like maybe it worked for like 4 hours, but if you took like a 10-hour flight or something, it might stop working at hour 8. So that's really how do you have to run an 8-hour test? And then so Arn did that, like keeping the thing in motion by taping it to a ceiling fan and have it go for like all night.
There are just a couple of non-serverless production spooky stuff.
Yeah,
but yeah,
we'll get to the serverless ones.
Yep.
Yes, we'll get. I started with a non-very serverless one, but spooky production mishaps are not only in the realm of a serverless software, and I think there is value to talking about even the non-serverless ones because there's similarities between software development lifecycle practices as well as what causes a lot of problems. Potentially it's not necessarily the technology itself. Sometimes it is, but it's the humans that utilize it and the circumstances they don't think through. I wasn't particularly thinking that the prompt from the Boeing story would be like Tell me another time you felt like you were flying a plane about to fall out of the air in your software-related career. But that is quite the good and funny segue there. But this situation that you're talking to me about, it makes me think about how it's useful to think through the actual scenarios that your product needs to withstand in the real world, not just in a test environment, but what are the expectations of the customer? And then how do you actually test as similar to those live conditions as possible? And when you're doing something that requires like barometer telemetry, you have to be creative sometimes, as you're saying, Arn, with in a vacuum sealed bag and a ceiling fan. This is some like aeronautical engineering level of thinking through proxying the problem.
Oh,
Yeah, and the other way we solve the problem of like being able to test like is it actually accurately measuring pressure changes? We have like a vacuum chamber. You can put the phone in and crank up the vacuum in the chamber, and then you get your measurements of barometer changing.
yes.
Because you can't just like sit in your home office and change the altitude.
I mean, this problem of not having the right conditions is literally like related to, I mean, production conditions related to the story that we're going to tell later, right? Yeah, somewhat.
Particularly spooky.
Particularly, yeah.
Well, without further ado, why don't you delve into your spooky serverless production story? Since we're talking about productions, we've already spooked ourselves with the nature of production environments. Let's add the serverless piece.
Yeah. So we have a customer we're consulting with where my team, All Apps, is embedded into their organization, their development organization, to help generally scale out their serverless environment. The company is called Backers. Wonderful company. It's like a SaaS for supporting young people and their growth, in academics and job and all that business, right? One of the things they needed to do was ramp up the amount of engagement for the scholars and students, and that involves scheduling masses of emails and notifications and things like this to go out. And in order to do that, we need to print those notifications into the database, right? And kick them off. And the way we had that was we had a Lambda that could be called, and that thing would need to persist through batch writes, a couple thousand records into the database for a downstream process to take up later, right? That's, for example, if I need to send a message to 10,000 people. Imagine that. You call a Lambda to do that, and I would prepare. So we sort of got this all working in the local development environments, and we were going to, this is not technically during production, but we'd had to work in our pre-production environment, the serverless environment that we had set up to mirror production. And we noticed that when it was deployed, some of the messages, there's some of it would work, right? Basically, it would partially appear to persist some of the records, and then others would just not work, and then randomly a little bit later on those messages would appear in the database, and the whole thing was running with an incredibly non-deterministic situation. And we were like, we needed to get this out because it's ready to go, right? Then this produced a lot of monkey chaos because we were thinking maybe the database is not big enough, right? So here we are, like basically doing local development optimization in in local environments to jack up the amount of available connections and the size of the database. Then we scaled it up in production. In the staging environment to also jack up the database there. And then we tore down everything that was complex about this into like just the basic things it was doing to no avail. And so we were sort of freaking out, saying, it's time we have to go to production. There's like students waiting to go, right? So that we called Scott. Hey, Scott, there's a ghost inside of our Lambdas that no one understands. What is going on? Because then we did everything. We had an alternate parallel repo where everything complicated was removed, and yet it was exhibiting the behavior. Is that the sum of it, Scott? Before it got to you?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. So what did you do?
Yeah. There was this thought that like it was maxing out database connections and that it was just hanging there. But my thinking was, Lambdas work a little different than an app running in Express. It may start as soon as you get a request. And also just studying the code, we had it was using kind of an in-process job queue. And locally that worked no problem. But on Lambda, it would work partially. And then maybe later on, it seemed to start back up again. So reading through the docs of Lambda and reading about the execution model for Lambda, and there's a concept of freezing a process. So as soon as a request is finished, an HTTP request Lambda, so as soon as it returns the response, AWS freezes the process, and then another request comes in, can unfreeze the process to, it's quicker than a full cold start because process is already loaded into memory, it's just frozen. And so, I think that's what was happening. It was unfreezing a process, and then, the background job's still in memory in this process that's unfrozen, picks back up, starts going again.
And we could literally see this. We were starting to see this, basically looking at CloudWatch. We were a request would go in, some things would fire, and then another request would, but then, some of the things were committed, and then another request would come in, and then after that, things are starting to show up in the database, right? So this is like a dead ringer for what Scott was saying. Something was somehow rehydrating the process, right? And continuing from where it is. So basically we systematically reproduced it, right? And confirmed that actually what we're doing is not right. So instead of actually trying to call this is called the in-memory event bus that we had inside of the app, into Lambda, basically, right? The Express app, which we deployed as a Lambda, right, entirely. Instead of doing that, rather than posting the metadata into that queue, we established an SQS queue, and then those things get persisted into there, and then just created a Lambda, which then took those off the queue and did whatever it needed to do to schedule those properly, and that cleared it right up. Right, so that's and then we were able to release this on time. It was there was also some compounding problem relating to provisioned. What was that, Scott?
We had Backers has provisioned concurrency on their Lambdas, which is a feature to keep some Lambdas hot, and so you can respond to more requests quickly. And that just compounded the confusing nature of it, where because it's has these hot Lambdas, sometimes it would work more than others. So it was just this non-deterministic, what we like to call Heisenbug, where it's a bug that doesn't always happen and is very frustrating to try to debug. But yes, main thing is don't try to do things in the background in your HTTP request handler Lambdas. Don't do that. Put it on an SQS queue or some other queue, and then have something listen on that, and then do the background work.
Yeah, and yeah, then I grew back the hair I lost during that time because the we were able to successfully go do that, and yeah, it went well.
And then this came up again with another customer,
Literally,
where they were like experiencing a similar problem on code that they engineered, not us. But similar thing where it was working great locally, and then on Lambda, not working. Why? And it was like, oh, this sounds very similar to something we had recently experienced, and turned out they were doing something similar where they had like an in process kind of queue.
yeah. It apparently is not an uncommon problem that people will that people will encounter, right? So I'm hoping like some of the people listening to this either be like, oh yeah, I've been bitten by that, or people who are planning to scale out, right? This is a thing.
Fantastic. So what would be like the major takeaway, or the succinct, like the axiom to remember or think about? Or maybe there's a couple from the scenario.
About,
Yeah, do your background work, queue your background jobs, and if you're using Lambda, use a queue, and then something else listens to that queue and then picks it up. Don't try to do it in the same request response in the background, where you can, like in a Node.js Express server, you can run something in the background. It will happily run in the background. It's not going to kill the process. But in Lambda, after you say, the response is 200 okay, yes, got it, and respond to the browser, shuts it down. So can't do that.
Yep, that's the main thing. Is there anything to say? And then also concurrent provisioning, right? That there is an alternative to that where you can do dynamic provision, which takes a little bit more setup, but could make things a little less confusing.
Fantastic. No, those are two great takeaways indeed, and hopefully will prevent someone else from having their own spooky scenario down the line.
Yeah,
Always more spooky when it's oneself writing the code and causing it than analyzing someone else's. But depends, I suppose, on the situation.
also kind of like work locally. It's great. Everything's fantastic, right? Yeah, I mean, sort of like a local development is great for rapid iteration, but actually like deploying it often to the infrastructure is another thing you should do during development, in my opinion, also to avoid some of the stuff, right? Because by the time it gets to staging, you're ready to go, right? So doing it late is probably another thing to try to avoid, even though deploying to Lambdas often and the infrastructure that dev environment is a little slower. I would say I would do that much more often. Would you agree, Scott?
Yes.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Any other points you want to talk about this? What would you say was the spookiest part about it, the most unsettling part of the situation? Was it that it was Heisenberg-esque in terms of the indeterminants of what was going on, or something else?
Oh, it's basically debugging and trying to find out it's the non-deterministic behavior. Like that was the most disturbing thing of all. I mean, like it just things appear to randomly happen, right? Because there's people sharing the staging environment, just like production. You never knew when somebody is gonna make a request to to actually unblock the unfrozen thing. So it would appear to work suddenly and sometimes, but not really in other times. And that's what is the pure definition of spooky for me. Also practically impossible to reproduce locally in your developed environment.
Mhm.
That's probably the second thing. I mean, we were tearing everything down, and we were trying our best to reproduce it, and nothing was working.
Yeah. When you're debugging, you have you start to get theories and go down one path of like what you think the problem is. So you start thinking, oh, this is really exhibiting the symptoms of, database pool connection exhaustion. And so you start like maybe convincing yourself that that's it. And then you can't see what's happening over here. Or because you're focused on this solution. You're like, yeah, this has got to be it.
Yeah. I mean, we were like batching the transactions to make sure that it wasn't because it was the date, we were taking too long for individual transactions to go through, right? So we put that in there and nothing was working. So yeah, that's probably the most frustrating stuff about it.
But I would suggest if you're debugging something with the team, or hopefully, if you have just getting another set of eyes on it who has not been already in it for a day can help, because they're not already down the rabbit hole that you're down. So it can help you think of other things that you may not have thought of yet.
Certainly. And if you already spent so much time going down one rabbit hole, if someone else can go down a different rabbit hole, they can spend that same amount of time.
Go down more rabbit holes together.
Exactly. You cover more ground that way. You don't know which rabbit is the one that holds the pot of gold at the other end.
That's a good point. I mean, our team basically created a microcosm of the app, right? Remember this guy? Like, we had like an alternate place we could deploy this, and we could basically took care of all the paths that were not the problem.
Yeah. Now we're going into like debugging techniques. Yeah, that's another good one, is just like breaking down the world and making like the simplest possible reproduction scenario. Like reproduce this without anything else happening, so you can eliminate all of the other factors.
Yep. And yeah, I mean, and getting the fresh pair of eyes is just is really super crucial. I mean, there's other things where like I poured over this problem with and for about 2 days, and then I basically got it to the point where like it looks like everything literally is perfect. And I looked at it for 2 days and was going blind, literally cross-eyed. And I showed Scott, okay, what's wrong with this? Remember this, Scott? Then you saw, oh, here's a double await. What's going on? And that clean, when you remove that, everything else around the code was already perfect. So it just worked. Ooh.
Oh yeah, forgot about the double await.
Yeah, it's yep.
No,
Okay.
very, very good. So I have another serverless production legend, quite horrific urban legend that I want to share with everyone today, and hopefully get Scott Aaron, your opinion a little bit on it, as well as as the principles of Olio apps. You're in the code, you're running a business, you're negotiating with clients, you are doing organization relationship building. And so this has to do with that as well. Because I think some of the scariest production mishaps I have heard about are not just solely due to code. So I want everyone to imagine a scenario. A software consulting company is petitioned by a well-funded, well-respected startup. Revenue is pumping, and they're looking to re-architect a state-of-the-art serverless backend system. The deal moves quickly. Closes and contracts are signed. Things couldn't be better. You even were able to hand the front end of the project to another agency so you could work on your specific area of expertise. For the first 6 to 9 months, it couldn't be better. The teams are integrated. They're driving along. Everyone is quite happy. However, the new year clicks in, and it turns out some invoices have not been paid. Upon further inspection, unbeknownst to the technology department, one of the other principals is under investigation by the federal government. Indicted, some would say. The process that this company does, actually, they lease the technology to another company that performs the actual actions that were being described. Because this other principal behaved the way they did, the company itself actually does not own the front end of the entire application that is receiving production workload. Funny enough, because of provision where one does not transfer intellectual property rights until payment has been received. Thankfully, you weren't the only one not getting paid. Everyone was not getting paid, compounding the scenario. As soon as this glorious situation arrived, it disappeared. One's ideal client, one's beautiful state-of-the-art serverless infrastructure that they built and was serving clients that you spent nearly a year working on is functionally useless and may never see the light of day again. Truly, truly horrific.
Oh my goodness.
Well, there's technology problems, and then there's legal problems.
I mean, how did such a thing come to happen? There's like just miscommunication or bad faith or better.
Hard to particularly tell, especially because, without being a person involved or a person in it, impossible to tell. In situations like this, in the interfaces of like human behavior and technology, there's a book I really like by old school serverless hero Goiko Adzik called like Humans versus Computers. And if there is anything to get from that book, it has to do with it being particularly sometimes we make assumptions with the technology that we use and the benefits of the technology that we're building, which may not be representative of what's going on around the technology. So I would say in this scenario, something like that was definitely happening.
Let's see. Yeah, definitely. The human part of consulting is a whole other skill set, right? Keeping everybody expectations between all the parties and all the humans together. It's yes, that the hardest thing to debug of all is other people. It's always like that. I can't say, Scott, we've enjoyed that type of a scenario, which thank goodness we sort of said stay clear of any issues like that, because it is a horror. Yeah, it is a company breaker when you lose trust between customer and consultant, and I guess sub-consultant. Yeah.
Completely. Because I know, in our audience, not only are there individuals who, are just engineers, but we also have like international audience, people are contractors. And there always is this, this tension between, wanting to develop, wanting to build the state-of-the-art architecture, wanting to build the things that one enjoys and one likes and finds meaning in, as well as, how can you effectively communicate that and align with those principles with whoever you're building it with? So if you had a second to talk about strategies for alignment early on in a conversation, even, and I think this is even useful information for if you are an employer wanting to work with an individual or a company. Like, what are the kinds of questions you would want to that you should be thinking about or asking?
Well,
I would think about priorities and figuring out for us, for our customers, like, is their priority, speed of iteration, or rapid prototyping, or is it hardening and scaling? Those are different modes. So sometimes it's more important to get something out there and see if this product is going to work. And sometimes it's more important to make sure this thing is super hard and never going to go down, and will never go down even if AWS region A goes down. So those are different modes of working, and you have to figure out what the priority is for the customer and work with that in mind.
that's to kind of get agreement, right, with the mission that's actually being, agreement with the mission agreement on the mission that we're actually undertaking with the customer. And so, I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, we always assign like a success manager. We have a different term for it inside, like that, an OOS person who's responsible to be the voice of the customer and also our voice, right? So that everybody through that role, basically, we can always be rowing in the right direction, right? And also understand and manage change as it happens through requirements, because sometimes you do want to transition from the let's get it going to the hardening and all that business, right? So basically, somebody's business is to make sure everybody's happy, right? I'd imagine, Scott, it's kind of like what we do with our customers.
Yeah, and I can also I can have my engineering hat on and be like, I want to make the ultimate perfect architecture, but that might not be in the current customer. That might not be the customer's current priority or best interest.
Yeah, that's true. It's one of the things we can do is do dialogue, right? Not just like, hey, we need this to happen, and okay, we're going to do it for you. It's not quite like that. We also have our perspectives. We've been doing this for quite some time for wide variety of customers too. It's not exactly like it's more than just challenging those assumptions, but it's dialoguing with them. It's all about communication, right? So that's something I think we do relatively well, right? Let's see. Also, having like a change control process, right? Where we basically have a structured for a way to negotiate changes in initial scope, which, happens despite, trying to set it up entirely exactly the beginning. So that's another form of communication shared between the client and us. So, and of course, like regular check-ins, right? The normal thing, right? We also do that at a period that is comfortable for both of us. So yeah, all of these are communication instruments for coordination to avoid that horror story. It all adds up to not having that, in my opinion. Would you agree?
100 million%.
Yeah,
I would agree in that way. Especially even, there's a lot of talk about, what does a 10x engineer look like, or a 100x engineer look like? And I think everyone in my space, striving for like that 10x engineer kind of moniker. But even if you're just an individual contributor or part of a team, you're not a consultant, you're not a contractor, you're trying to break into a different industry, level up your skills. All of these things that we just discussed about aren't just relevant to if you're a consulting company. I would say you're doing like commercial work, business to business, but also if you're an individual contributor, less so, but also things to think about. How are you communicating Like, what is the process for changing direction within the team? Who is the one advocating for your best interest as well as the team's best interest and the company's best interest? These are all questions to be thinking about and to be seeing reflected in your environment. I would encourage, at least at the very least, just to try to reflect where is that communication happening or not happening. And if you can't recognize any of it, that could be a sign that things may not go well the longer the process goes through time, because we can't predict the future, but we can adopt processes and ideas to help us adapt to changes that we cannot predict.
I'd like to mention on
Yes.
top of that is that if you don't have to be a 10x engineer to be massively effective within a mission. You can be a 1x or 2x engineer, but if you have all the people rowing in the same mission and coordinated and cooperating properly, you're the leverage you can get from a 1 or 2x engineer, right, is better than a 10x engineer who's building the wrong thing at the wrong time for the wrong people. That's absolutely the disaster you want to avoid. Would you say? I mean, I know this is true, Scott.
Yeah, well, it's like
okay.
Communication is 50% of a 10x engineer's job. If you're that's like gonna 10x your effectiveness, is like proactive and good communication.
Yep.
I love that. I want to write that one down and post it on my wall. So beautiful.
Thanks.
Now, let me go. So Scott, we do have a question from the audience, and that is, are you Captain Kirk right now for your costume?
Yes.
And if not, yeah, there we go. Very nice.
Yeah, that's kind of funny.
Easily.
Didn't realize I was sporting the Captain Kirk costume today.
There's one thing to dress up as Captain Kirk. There's difference to be Captain Kirk on the daily basis. So good to see that you're at that level. Scott is at that level. If anyone is questioning.
Yeah, I appreciate
reading all my Star Trek memes.
Love it.
Nice.
Awesome.
No, I was going to say I wanted to go to the comments and see if we had anything, any questions, comments, or anything from that. But the Captain Kirk, I think, is what we're rolling with today. And Buff Tomato was thoroughly feeling spooked by the beginning of the stream. So good. I'm happy to say that. I think talking about the things that scare us tell us about ourselves in general. So what are the things that and by analyzing that, we can learn to oh wow. These are some deep cuts. I love it. Very good.
Hideo Kojima.
Very good. But if we can identify the things that scare us in development, we can bolster our skills, develop processes that help us calm those fears and allow us to be afraid of other things, so we can then get better at those, maybe in the most optimistic fashion.
Yeah, and getting into these scary scenarios is actually some of my favorite things in my whole life, because I survived them, right? I've learned from them. It's like in shows about doctors, they're always trying to get into the crazy surgeries and stuff like that, and competing for those. I love scenarios where we had to figure it out, that serverless debugging thing that Scott talked about. I have a library in my head of those Heisenberg bugs that we encountered, cataloging them, and I understand how I grew from each of them. So yeah, though the weird contractual thing you mentioned is a story that I haven't yet experienced. Truly terrifying, though. I think probably going through that helped you as well, right? Like lessons on how to go forward.
A billion percent. Because I think one of the immediate takeaways one could think about was was like, oh, like level one reflection is, oh, in every contract I sign where I am developing product for someone else, there needs to be some clause where it's like, this isn't work for hire. This is work that you own once you pay me. However, one thing you'll find in practice, if you do start doing that to people, people are like, no, 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 this isn't what I want. There's that. Or B, it's pretty aggressive language contractually. So someone has to be willing to accept that. Or they're usually the conversation around, well, why is this? And you need to have like a particularly good reason. Um, level one again could be, oh, well, this, I've been burned in the past, and I just need to do this. That's kind of like a by fiat negotiation way. But number two, I think a smarter way to think about it, especially if you are dealing with a startup or with a client that particularly has risk associated with it, you frame it that way, where because of the nature of your business or where you sit or your industry, there's inherently more risk for me as the service provider. This decision is going to really affect my business by X amount of months or years by committing these resources to you or building the software. And there just needs to be a comparable way for if something does happen, because we can't predict the future. We need to be communicating about that process before something bad even happens. That's the best time. Things get scary, and things get scary when you haven't thought about the problem before it happens. If you've already thought through it, you have an action plan at the very least.
Oh yeah, totally agree there. And yeah, I hear you saying about the strong language, but it's better to encounter that friction first up front versus like in court or something like that.
Yes, right?
Yeah, just yeah, do the work of making sure everything's clear right in front, and then I think it's just better, right? This is good advice, not just for like business, but like just generally, I think, right?
Totally.
Yeah. People don't like surprises
Mhm.
if they can avoid it.
Yes. Fun surprises can be fun, but even some people don't even like that. So you got to be careful. Much better to have your first major disagreement, before the contract is signed rather than in court. It costs a lot more money to disagree in court than it does to disagree before the contract is signed.
I mean, it's like same way for software engineer, right? Basically, like it's the more expensive the bug is. Sorry, the earlier you catch it, the cheaper the bug is. Versus
Yes.
like bug is like rolling all the way to production. It's like exponentially more expensive to fix it then. So or catch it. So yeah.
Very good. And this way, fear is beneficial, because if you can be afraid of something before it's happened, you can anticipate the problem, maybe figure it out, upskill, develop the process to circumvent the problem, do some real good testing close to production conditions before you're even there, and then you won't have a problem, or at least you have a process. So very good, very good.
I mean, this happened to us, right? Like several customers ago, like we had issues with like figuring out how to control change, right? So we developed the process, and now every customer we go into, we have this thing, right? This is how we manage change. Here's the procedure. So rolling it like it's then the business of engaging a customer is always improving over time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that stuff is like started out pretty squishy and vague, and now we're getting more, just a more formal process around it. It's good.
Yep. Iteration.
Rockin'. Well, Scott, Arn, thank you so much for being willing to be my spooky guests from beyond the crypt, to chat a little bit about production mishaps, horror stories, the nature of like fear in software development. These are things that are important to, I think, discuss, to figure out and be comfortable with. Because it's not all sunshine and rainbows anywhere for anyone. And so, but understanding how we navigate those challenging waters, how we navigate the ghosts and the ghouls as they spring up unexpectedly, is important and useful for all of us, whether we're individual contributors, aspiring senior engineers, comfortable with being a 1X or 2X engineer, or a consulting company. All this is very practical and applicable advice, in my opinion. And I knew you'd give some, so I wanted you both on here. So I'm glad it worked out.
Yeah, thank you. This is a lot of fun.
It was, yeah. I appreciate it.
Rocking. Great. And then we got Kojima, we got Captain Kirk, and we have, apparently I'm a true blood vampire by the nature of my fangs. So I wasn't planning for that, but it is true, I guess. But Scott Arn, if people are interested in, I don't know, learning more about you or learning or connecting with you, where's a good way just to connect with you and ask you more questions on how to conquer fear?
You can check out our website. It's oleoapps.com without a space like spelled here. And yep.
Rock,
That's probably the best place to start.
Yeah. And yep, contact me. Just love to chat.
Rockin'. Sounds good. I forget if you all are if you use Discord or not, but if you aren't yet in the Believe in Serverless Discord,
You need to get in that Discord. Not in there yet.
All right. Well, background gremlin, help us. I'll say that. We'll figure it out. But very good. No, awesome community. I love hanging out with them, and I'm happy to be hosting today's spooky event in costume. But until next time, this was Tales from the Crypt, and we will see you later.